The only pro-slavery website on the entire internet has been taken down rather recently, and this should come as a shock to many people because this website was actually gathering tons of materials to prove the fact that slavery should still exist. Yes, this indeed was a website, this indeed was a thing, and of course there is slavery in other places of the world, but we need to ask ourselves some questions. What if I were to observe history and speak as though government is a necessary evil? What if we said that without it, society would fall into chaos and ruin? That without it, people would run amok, doing all sorts of wrong because people are not capable of being peaceful or moral without some sort of system to protect the innocent and punish the guilty? Now, what if I were to say that these are the same exact justifications for slavery as used in the 19th century and almost every century before then? What if I were to say that these justifications have existed since the foundation of government, which we simultaneously observe as the foundations to all institutional or systemic slavery? What if I were to say that the most pro-slavery advocates were the most pro-government advocates? Finally, what if I were to say that these advocates even admitted that government is based on violence and not real consent, yet still claiming their necessity because they saw slavery as good? During the times of the 19th century, pro-slavery advocate Senator Hammond of South Carolina stated, "The great strength of the South arises from the harmony of her political and social institutions. This harmony gives her a frame of society, the best in the world, and an extent of political freedom combined with entire security, and as no other people ever enjoyed upon the face of the earth. In all social systems there must be a class to do the mean duties, to perform the drudgery of life. That is a class requiring but a low order of intellect and but little skill. Such a class you must have, or you would not have the other class, which leads to progress, refinement, and civilization. It constitutes the very mudsills of society and of political government. Fortunately for the South, she has found a race adapted to that purpose to her hand. A race inferior to herself, but eminently qualified in temper, in vigor, in docility, in capacity to stand the climate, to answer all her purposes. We use them for the purpose and call them slaves. We are old-fashioned in the South, yet it is a word discarded now by ears polite. But I will not characterize that class at the North with that term. But you have it. It is there, it is everywhere, it is eternal. Northern laborers are but slaves. Many pro-slavery newspapers would attack the efforts of the abolitionists, those who want to end slavery, such as the New York Courier and Inquirer having an article titled, "Shall the government be preserved or the abolitionists have their will?" saying, "Do you, fellow citizens, feel this disregard for the Constitution of your country? Are you ready to do an act that from the very nature of things must plunge this great nation into confusion and disaster, and then stand with impious lips to charge the calamity upon your God? We trust not. We will not suffer ourselves to entertain so foul a suspicion of our countrymen." And I've given this example before in this documentary talking about slavery and how there might be forms today that we are upholding. Well, here you see this common trend here. These pro-slavery advocates are promoting the government and saying that without slavery, you don't have the government. So what's going on here? Where are we today? We have no slavery, we say, no chattel slavery. But do we still have slavery? The pro-slavery advocate Thornton Stringfellow states, "What is slavery in the United States? It is a system of personal servitude under a form of government adopted for the African race, the leading principle of which belongs to every form of government among men." What is that leading principle? It is submission to and control by the will of another. This is the essential principle of all forms of government, and without it, there can be no government. What is government and what is its origin? Government is control. It is the opposite of freedom, or a right to do as we please. It is power to compel obedience to the will of a superior. Where did it originate? It originated in the will of God. Government must begin in absolute despotism instead of absolute freedom. The principle of subordination, sought to be overthrown by the abolitionists, is vital in church and state. The infidel principle of freedom and equality, sought to be established on its ruins, is unknown to the Bible, contradicted by all experience, and subversive of all governments among men. One teaches freedom and equality, the other teaches inequality and subordination. One leads to anarchy, the other to order. One leads to love, the other to hatred. One leads to war, the other to peace. Either liberty or civilization or both must die when the world is subjected to the control of their leading principle of freedom and equality among men. It is self-destroying when adopted and seeks to destroy all governments which do not recognize it. So as you see, this is powerful. If pro-slavery advocates saying that, hey, government, order, slavery, these are synonymous, and that freedom, chaos, and anarchy, and equality are synonymous. I mean, think about that for a moment, okay? But arguments aside from God, government, economy, and natural inequality would also include the idea that we are slaves to many things in our lives, and that slavery is like the family or the business structure. See, even on the Wayback Machine website archive, where you find a lot of websites that were taken off the internet, there was a website that's been around for quite some time now and was only taken down rather recently. It was called Slavery Advocate, and this was the only pro-slavery website on the internet. This is what it called itself, and it collects anti-abolitionist literature. And its motto states slavery, hierarchy, and virtue, and that absolute liberty is the death of morality. The website features hundreds of materials, even some modern sources, and it explains that humanity has embraced a doctrine of freedom, individual autonomy, and the goal of mass emancipation from fixed hierarchy. It says we oppose these pursuits. Now, it's important to know George Fitzhugh because he was a leading pro-slavery advocate in the 19th century, and he is known for coining the term sociology or socialism. He tells us, with thinking men, the question can never arise who ought to be free, because no one ought to be free. All government is slavery. The proper subject of investigation for philosophers and philanthropists is the existing mode of government adopted to the wants of its subjects? It is the duty of society to protect all its members, and it can only do so by subjecting each to that degree of government constraint or slavery which will best advance the good of each and of the whole. Liberty is an evil which government is intended to correct. This is the sole object of government. Adopt the slavery principle, vindicate the institution in the abstract, tighten the reins of government, restrain and punish licentiousness in every form, scout and repudiate the doctrines of let alone, and govern much and rigorously. This is the new world that we want. There is no such thing as natural human liberty because it is unnatural for man to live alone and without the pale and government of society. The slavery principle is almost the only principle of government and the distinctive feature of man's social and dependent nature, and the only cement that binds society together and wards off anarchy. The need of law and government is just in proportion to man's wealth and enlightenment. Barbarians and savages need and will submit to but few and simple laws and little of government, the love of personal liberty, and freedom from all restraint are distinguishing traits of wild men and wild beasts. No wonder the abolitionists loved to quote the Declaration of Independence. Its precepts are wholly at war with slavery and equally at war with all government, all subordination, all order. Life and liberty are not inalienable. Jefferson, in sum, was the architect of ruin, the inaugurator of anarchy. Okay, so this is a very big claim here. I mean, George even had the title of his book called The Failure of Free Societies, basically saying that freedom is just a dream. It's not actually a reality. So throw away all your concepts of rights, natural law, morality, freedom, equality, all that. No, that's nonsense, according to George Fitzhugh. And so you have Robert Louis Dabney, who was another pro-slavery advocate, and he stated that domestic servitude, as we define and defend it, is but civil government in one of its forms. All government is restraint, and this is but one form of restraint. So they're equating family structure, being slaves to things, being the fact that we're not all free in the same aspects, the fact that government is always control, that slavery should continue because slavery is basically government in just another form, and that government is slavery just in another form. So if you see this pattern, this is really shocking because very few historians have picked up on this. I mean, if you really want to conclude all these different quotes I provided, and there's a lot more out there that you can find, we see a clear distinction in those who see liberty as order and those who see slavery as order. One being the abolitionists and the other being the pro-slavery advocates. One stands with voluntary interaction, encouraging the moral and intellectual development of the individual, and the other stands with coercive interaction, encouraging the debasement and dehumanization of the individual. When these two views came face to face with the mass public, really out front, it became clear which was evidential for truth or true order. Chattel slavery, which the abolitionists were focusing on, was ended in the aggregate. The problem is, the mass public has not yet come face to face with the slavery caused by governments that both these parties talked about, which the abolitionists like Lysander Spooner called political slavery. So we stand now as abolitionists, or more specifically voluntarists, against pro-slavery statists. Statists are those who believe in the authority of those in power that we call government. I encourage you to answer the questions on the screen, because these questions will help you ask yourself about your own morality and if you are following this belief system called statism. If you want to learn more about that belief system, I encourage you read The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose. And if you're interested in more about the abolitionists and those who promoted slavery, you can read my book, Slavery Gone for Good, Black Book Edition. It has over 440 pages, hundreds of different quotes, former slaves, abolitionists, you name it, and we really break down every single topic. Be sure to watch our documentary on this whole matter. You can go to theliberator.us, theliberator.us. You can send us your article, I'll turn it into a video for you. But you can also find our whole documentary that we've been doing and a lot more resources, theliberator.us/index, theliberator.us/index. Thank you very much for watching, and ask yourself, why is it that the most pro-slavery advocates were the most pro-government? And why is it that government, ever since its foundation, has always been, and tends to show itself over time every time, that it's slavery? That's a big problem. Thank you for watching.